This episode of Midco Sports Magazine is presented by Shields.
Hello, welcome to Midco Sports Magazine. Well, here it is, the hazy days in the middle of summer, and we are talking about football. We got three stories coming up on North Dakota and South Dakota guys who have some interesting ties to the National Football League. We will take you to the Sioux Empire Football Officials Clinic, where local referees learn from those who have officiated some of the biggest football games in history, like the Super Bowl. And we'll go to Detroit and run down Zach Zenner, former South Dakota State superstar, who is making a play to stay at the game's highest level with the Detroit Lions. But we start with a North Dakota native who is one of the most recognizable voices in the National Football League. You've probably never seen his face, but when you hear that voice, you will say, ah, that guy. His name is Jim Birdsall, and David Brown has his story.
The Wildcats paint the Bahamas blue on ESPNU.
This isn't a tale as old as time. If you want to be technically accurate, it's a tale as old as a radio or a television. You hear something or you see someone and you wonder, how do I know that guy? For all the times you've ever said, hey, that's that guy from that thing, Jim Birdsall knows exactly what you're talking about.
Who is Jim Birdsall? I am an announcer. I'm that voice on the television or on the radio, or when you go online to some site, I might have to do parlor tricks, which are basically taglines that I've done for years. So I'd have to say, when you care enough to send the very best, Hallmark. So I do my parlor tricks, then they go, oh, that's what you do.
No one would ever say Jim Birdsall has the voice of an angel.
Just gravel and nastiness. It's the, buy this or I'll kick your ass voice.
But he's been making plenty of noise since a quiet upbringing in Gladstone, North Dakota.
It's kind of an idyllic childhood. I mean, right on the river. My best friends and I would get on rafts and go down the river. We'd fish, we'd swim in the river. It was a small town where everyone knew everyone, and you couldn't get in trouble because if there was problems, everyone knew who was doing it. Everybody knows everyone's business in a tiny town.
So how did Birdsall's business go from small-town fodder to big-time media? Well, it started as most success stories clearly do, by quitting school.
When I grew up in North Dakota, I was a musician. Played in rock bands, the Lost Souls, Phoenix, the Unbelievable Uglies. Imagine that. I had played football in high school. Then I dropped out and joined a rock band, but it really pissed my coaches off. But hey, that's the way it goes. Rock band, football, rock band, rock band. That rock band wins. It wins every time.
But rock star doesn't always become the best career choice. Despite being a high school dropout, Jim eventually completed his undergrad and master's work in theater.
Growing up where I grew up, I worked on farms when I was in the summers and, hauled bales and did all that. I knew I didn't want to do that. I knew I didn't want it. That's too hard. That is hard work.
The stage was set for Jim, or so he thought. A fellow actor commented on his voice and suggested he audition for some TV and radio spots.
I didn't even know this existed. I didn't have a television, and they didn't have television broadcast to where I lived until I was, I think, in the 6th or 7th grade.
In the mid-1980s, Jim landed his first gig with a local hardware store. And then he looked at his paycheck.
It just stunned me how much I was being paid. I was like, what? You're kidding me? For that? I guess I could do this.
At a time when his face was anonymous, Jim became synonymous with some of the biggest media properties in the country. Soon enough, he was cutting down on his acting in order to cut more voice tracks. He became the voice of Hallmark, the CNBC Financial Network, and National Geographic. But sports fans know him best when he says something like this.
When the Oakland Raiders came out in the fourth quarter, it's that kind of thing. for whatever reason, my voice cuts. You know, someone can have a great voice, so it doesn't mean it's going to cut on the air, meaning it, for whatever reason, it breaks through the music, whatever is going on, and people listen to it.
For a man who didn't even see an NFL game until he finished his master's degree, Jim mastered his audition and landed the gig of a lifetime at NFL Films, becoming one of their main voices for long-form narrations, Super Bowl highlights, and annual team recaps.
I talk more if they didn't win a lot of games. There's a lot more narration because there's not a lot of highlights.
Jim set up shop in this small Kansas City studio, where unbeknownst to those at the local daycare or the McDonald's next door, he eloquently describes some of the biggest moments in league history.
Now, I sit in one little room and send my voice all over the world. Strange job. It's not something that occurs to me except at that late night when you're sitting somewhere on the deck or something and you have a libation and you're staring at the moon and then all of a sudden become philosophic and say, God, I'm everywhere, aren't I?
From a small town with a population in the hundreds to developing a voice that reaches millions, Jim Birdsall is that guy. The guy who takes advantage of his opportunities. The guy who's learned from his mistakes. The guy you've always heard but never known until now. A proud North Dakota native. A rock star. A classically trained actor. A man with many talents, but not one idea of how he got here.
Dumb luck. Absolutely blessed luck. There is no other way to describe anything like this.
Here's David Brown, and that's a fun story, man. Nice work. And obviously we've know Birdsall through his voice for NFL Films, but we've probably heard him do a lot of other things as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned in the story, National Geographic, the voice of the CNBC network. When we visited him, he was auditioning for ESPN. He was doing reads for news affiliates in Seattle and Portland. He was doing a Walmart ad, a McDonald's ad, all these different things. Some of it is contracted work, but he says he actually auditions every day for different stuff. And it's just cool to see how he's basically built an empire solely on his voice.
All right, great pipes. Nice story.
Thank you.
David Brown. Up next, blowing the whistle with the best in the business, a clinic for local referees who get to learn a little something from some Super Bowl veterans.
Midco Sports Magazine on Midco Sports Network is presented by Shields.
Our thanks to Zach Zenner and to Jim Birdsall and everybody with the Sioux Empire Officials Clinic. We'll see you next month on Midco Sports Magazine.
This has been Midco Sports Magazine, presented by Shields.